Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 428, Meeples and Monsters.
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation Podcast is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. Go to their website, check out their awesome product. I didn't say amazing this time, so there you go.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Check out their awesome product. You can add a game topper to any table, almost any surface. Enhance your game night. And then when you're done, you can take it down, stick it in your closet. But when it's not in use, you can put it away and have life back to normal. And then when game night hits, it becomes game night.
Or you can buy some dining leaves and never take it down and just transform your game room into a dining room.
Or you can get dining leaves and a leg kit and just use it as your dining table and then play games as soon as dinner's over.
What a great idea.
Go check it out, GameToppersLLC.com.
Welcome to Meeple Nation. We are your hosts. I am Andy Holliday.
I'm Nathan Howard.
And I'm Dave Holliday.
We again are missing Logan. He is working tonight, but
Work is lame.
if we didn't have to pay bills, life would be so much better because we could all quit our jobs and just play games and record podcasts. Unfortunately, life is not that way. But you can still check out all of our podcasts on our website at meeplenation.com. Not only are there links to all of our previous episodes, we also have blogs and photos, bios of each of us, plus bios of our bloggers. There's also a link to our Patreon page. If you like what we do, we would appreciate any support that you could click the link over to our Patreon page and help us make Meeple Nation better.
We are so grateful for that support.
We really are, and we thank those that have already joined us on Patreon. If you have any questions, you can email us at meeplenation@gmail.com. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. We have a Meeple Nation Off Air Facebook page that you can join as well.
This week we're discussing Meeples and Monsters. Meeples and Monsters is a game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 45 to 60 minutes. It's designed by Steiness and is published by AEG. A dark shadow has fallen upon the realm of Rowan. The evil forces of Mordra, pulled to the power of Sauron, together with the unfathomable monstrosities from the realm of people, have found ways to enter your world and are now invading everywhere. The king's army, weakened by years of war, is but a thin veneer of its former self. The desperate king turns to you, lords and ladies of the land, asking you to take action and save the realm from the dark powers. Whoever musters the most potent force, completing quests, adventures, and proving most effective against the invaders will be declared the new Earl Marshal. Win the game.
My brother Dennis brought this game to game night a few weeks ago. We were looking for a quickish game to play. Threw it on the table. I looked at the box. It's a little cheesy on the cover. You have characters. One's carrying a thing of wood glue. And it took me a little while to kind of wrap my head around all of the cheesiness that's going on with this. Because these are meeples, and as they are in battle, they, I guess, get cracks in their wood. He's the cleric, so he's the healer. So, of course, he has wood glue. The artwork and everything is meant to be a little bit quirky, cheesy. I don't know what the best word is for it. It doesn't play as quirky and cheesy as I was thinking it might when I first looked at the box.
As I just read that description, you have that feel, and you look at the box, you look at the instructions. All the characters are meeples. You see their meeple outline, but they're pliable meeples. Like the one guy scratching his chin, his arms bent around. The cleric looking at the rule book, got both of his arms moved. It has that kind of cheesy feel, but the game actually plays really well. I've only played it the one time. You guys have played it several times. I was really impressed with the game overall.
When you introduced the game, you mentioned that it's 45 to 60 minute playtime. We've discussed a couple of times recently, games always put their playtime on the box, and it's usually a big fat lie. In this game, every time I've played it, there's been new people. We were just barely learning how to play it. Really seems like it can stick pretty close to that.
The game I played, we played almost 90 minutes.
Pretty close to that.
Dave, I think you make that a big fat lie on most games.
That could be true. But the other people who were saying that don't play games very often with me, and that was their experience. Like, they were the ones who were saying that.
We need you to play test games. That's what it comes down to.
Totally.
So we can get accurate information.
Accurate time on the boxes.
Yes.
And fix all those breaks that you find.
Yeah. No, that's the best part of all those games.
So there's a main game for Meeples and Monsters. There are technically there are 5 regions. 5 regions on the game. There's the capital region, is the central region of the board, which you're only going to use during the development phase. The development phase is the first phase of each player's turn. During the development phase, where you get the opportunity to build buildings in the city or level up your meeples. Really thought it was cool that this is a bag builder. Not only are you gaining the different types of meeples, the warriors, the mages, clerics, and knights, and then there are some specialty meeples that might come out, but you're also leveling them up to make them more powerful and to gain abilities that you can use during the game. You can level up 1 meeple during the development phase. Do this by spending experience or points. Experience points are basically your victory points in the game. You start at 0, so you have to earn points before you can level anything up. You do that during the development phase. You can also place 2 of your peasants, which are the white workers, to build a building, and there are going to be 4 face-up buildings that will be available to build. And you can build one of the buildings in any of the 4 regions that have a building slot available. And each region will have 2 available building slots. When you build a building in a location, you're going to cover up something, and you gain the benefit of whatever it is you cover up. For example, if you build in the cathedral district, you're going to cover up a little plus symbol next to a red meeple, a cleric. You'll add a cleric into your lodging. I really like how the bag builder works on this. So every player has a player board. There's the tavern side and the lodging side. The lodging side is basically like your discard pile. The tavern side is where all of your active meeples that you're going to be using on your turn are going to be resting until you use them. Once you use a meeple, you place it on the board, and during cleanup, everything goes back to your lodging. You don't take anything back from your lodging back into your bag until your bag is empty.
Really plays just like favorite deck builder, right?
It really does, yeah.
Draw your cards. You have your hand of cards, which are those meeples that are in your tavern. Play them, and then at the end of your turn, you clean up, put them all into the discard pile, which is the lodgings, and then they stay there until, I'm reaching to draw, and I'm out of meeples, and to reshuffle them into my bag. Really, really cool. It plays seamlessly.
The one thing I do like about this over a regular deck builder game, when you're looking at the lodging, you just have to remember the color. And you can put those wherever you want during your development phase or the build phase. But when they're in your lodging, it makes it really easy to manage and keep track of what you have in your bag, which I think is big, especially for this game.
For sure, because there are quest cards in the game you're going to want to be able to complete. And some of those, you have to have a certain number of 5 knights, for example. It's a lot easier to determine whether you have actually met that because of the fact, like you said, Nathan, you can see what's in your lodging, essentially what's in your discard pile. Much easier to manage and try to get that right combination that you're looking for when you have exact idea of what you have going into your bag.
And going back to the board, those clerics, knights, mages can all go to different buildings and serve different purposes just to be able to look forward to what you have and where you can use it. I thought was a big part of this game. Allowed me to manage my bag more efficiently or be envious of your guys' bag. I went in a much different direction than both of you, which is probably why I ended up where I did in the score. Again, that comes from experience. You guys have played several times, and so you knew the importance of, you were both getting those clerics and those knights. If they were in your tavern, they would allow you to pull extra meeples out of your bag. Hugely beneficial, and I didn't realize that that was a thing that was happening until later in the game. It was very difficult for me at that point to pick up any clerics, to pick up any knights.
That's because we took a page out of your book and kept a few back pocket rules.
I'm telling you, that wins. That wins you games.
That's not something the clerics or the knights do right off the bat. You actually have to level your knights up by 1 level for that to happen, and your cleric also by 1 level. 1 and 2, it gets better.
Yeah.
The knights, as soon as you level up your knight, their ability is what it is. Their strength goes up at level 3. The knight flat out gives you draw. The cleric, on the other hand, you have to draw a corruption meeple. The corruption meeples I thought was interesting. Once again, this is very much how it's like a deck builder. Everyone has the 7-3 ratio that you see in so many deck builders. Your starting deck, there's a 7-3 ratio. You have 7 peasants and 3 corruption meeples in your bag. Corruption meeples basically represent the evil villagers in town that are sympathetic to the monster's cause.
Let's call them Dave.
They're the Daves in your village, are sympathetic to the monster's cause. They don't do anything, with the exception of if you play with the Towers expansion, they can be useful. Otherwise, in the base game, don't do anything other than they can give you extra draws with your cleric.
Not only that, I mean, there's some buildings that make it so that they can give you extra strength as well. Clerics can use them to strengthen other meeples. Going back to the main board, talked about that first district where you can gain clerics when you build over the empty building slots. The next district just east of there is the yellow district, it's the university. Again, it has 2 building spots, and on both of those building spots, if you build a building, you cover up the spot, you're going to gain a yellow meeple, which is the mage. In the bottom left, you have the village. On one of those spots, it lets you draw 2 new quest cards, decide which one you want to keep, and discard the other one.
Those 2 quest cards go to your hand of quest cards, and you can even discard a quest card that you previously had drawn in a different round.
The other building spot down there gains you a white meeple, which is a peasant, which really in this game you're generally trying to get rid of. It's kind of like gaining a copper in Dominion, but then you also gain a blue, which is the warrior that can be useful.
There is a reason why in this particular location you're gaining a peasant with a warrior, because the warriors work really well with peasants in the game. It is a strategy you can take, and peasants can actually be pretty beneficial depending on what quest cards you gain and whether you level up your warriors completely. The last spot that's the permanent region on the board is the castle. Castle, once again, also has 2 building locations that you can place buildings on. Both of those also let you draw 2 quest cards and then discard a quest card from your hand. Not only do each of these regions have 2 spots to build a building, also have a permanent worker placement location. For example, the cathedral, you place 2 workers on the cathedral. They can be any colored workers at all. One of them is going to be discarded back into the supply, gains you a cleric. University, put any meeple on the university and you gain a mage. Village, actually put 3 workers on the village space.
One of them has to be white.
One
right?
has to be white. One of the other 2 has to be discarded. It can be a white meeple, and that will give you a warrior. Finally, the castle, you place a peasant and a warrior at the castle, and you will gain a knight, which is one of the few ways to gain knights in the game.
Nathan, like you pointed out, they seem like they're a little bit better than the others.
By far, they're the most powerful of the basic unit.
Powerful for battle strength, plus when you upgrade them, you get to draw extra meeples.
Yeah, they're very thing to get plenty of, but they're not the easiest things to get.
Problem is, I ended up with 1 red meeple in my bag and 1 black meeple in my bag. I didn't realize the benefit of getting those extra draws until after you guys had started leveling them up, at the point where it was just way too difficult for me to try to focus on that because I had flooded my bag with mages and peasants. My peasants were super cool because they could fight.
Yeah, I was impressed with what you were doing with your peasants.
They were adding tons of fight for each battle that I went after. I had a good strategy in mind, but I just didn't realize the benefit, the cleric and the knight. Like you said, I think the knight, by far, the most powerful of the basic meeples.
Honestly, with you going with the peasant strategy, upgrading your warriors would have been huge. Your fully upgraded warrior will bring a peasant from your...
My warriors were level 3.
Okay.
They would allow me to pull a peasant from the lodgings. I always made sure that I had peasants in my lodging. The warrior would allow that peasant to... It would always add 2 to my fight because all my peasants added 2 to the fight because I had a bonus on them. Just allowed me to pull that and gave me an extra 2 fight every time.
2 fight is a big deal in this game because most things monsters will have maybe a 10 defense that you have to meet.
If you look at all of the meeples, the mage never gets above a 1 fight. The cleric never gets above a 1 fight. Knight gets up to a 3, and the warrior, I think, gets to a 3. For a peasant to be at 2, that's pretty darn awesome. And we talk about your strategy there. You were actually pretty close. You and Andy finished really close to each other.
Actually, Andy and I tied with 72.
I was just going to say, I thought you might have tied. Yeah. And the only reason that I didn't tie with you guys is I ended up just getting super lucky on my quest cards. Got a bunch of quests that were end of game scoring. Scored a bunch of points that way.
The only reason that you didn't tie with us is because you had an extra 21 points. Honestly, that's what breaks it down. Yeah. We would have tied, except for you had an extra 21 points.
Right. We've talked a lot about the basic meeples. There are 3 other meeples that you can get in the game as well. The shaman, which is an orange meeple. The green meeple, which is the ranger. And the purple meeple is the paladin. You never level them up. They come in at a level. I think the shaman is a 3 and the ranger's a 2 and the paladin's a 1. They never level up, but they are very unique and have cool abilities.
Their powers are pretty amazing. Honestly, the shaman, I think, is the most powerful meeple in the game.
I agree.
Paladin gives you +1 fight for every level of monster. There are 3 different levels of monsters. Actually, there are 4, technically. In the monster deck, there are 3. And then there are bosses at the very end of the game that you'll get to fight, and they're level 4. So when he comes in, he's a power 2, and then you add extra strength to him. Got 2 strength, you add an extra strength for every level of monster you're fighting. So at the beginning of the game, probably unlikely to get a paladin anyway, but if you're lucky enough to get a paladin at the beginning, you're fighting level 1 monsters, he's a 3 strength, which is as high as a knight gets at max level. Paladins are great fighters. Ranger, monsters that the ranger's assigned to, they're worth an extra victory point. And then finally, the shaman, you can choose a basic unit type. So that's any of the basic ones, warrior, mage, cleric, and knight, or even peasant. And the shaman counts as both a shaman and that basic unit type when you assign it to a monster. If you're getting bonuses from certain unit types and you play a shaman, that shaman counts as that same type.
Right, so he gets his original 2 strength.
Right.
Plus any bonuses. If, Nathan, we talked about your peasants, he could also be a peasant and get those bonuses that you have.
That's an awesome new rule. Thanks for pulling that out now. I could have used that last.
Did give you all of the cards and tell you to read them.
Thanks for the new rule.
Speaking of those cards, each of the character types, there's a little set of cards for everybody. As you level them up, you put a little card in your player area. On your player board, there's a picture of each unit, and you put a card down on level 2, and then when you upgrade to level 3, you flip it over to 3. 3 is the max. Now, the other thing that the shaman does, though, he counts as any other type basic unit when you assign it to a monster, but also when you assign it to a location. Talked about the development phase. After the development phase is the main phase, and that's when you assign your meeples to either monsters or locations. Remember, we just built buildings during the development phase. Well, those buildings now are locations that you can assign meeples to. They'll have different abilities. You talked about the permanent abilities already, and there's a lot of different buildings. Only 8 will get used throughout the game, but there are a lot of different buildings that have different abilities. As the game develops, based on what buildings come into play, that is quite often based on what quests you have and things like that. So there's a lot of different directions you can go. But the buildings, they have a lot of cool things that they can do. Some of the buildings will come out, and if you assign certain meeples together, you'll get one of the upgraded unit types. You can get a shaman or a paladin or a ranger.
And that's one of the few ways you can get the prestige class meeples through the buildings that we build on the board.
Right.
The only other way to really get them is through the different tower if you're playing with the Towers expansion.
There's a couple of quests.
Yeah, there's quests.
That's right. And there are quest cards that you can gain that, honestly, the quest cards that give you those types of meeples, the prestige meeples, aren't super common, and neither are the tower cards.
Right. So it's very likely to have a game where you're not going to get those.
We've only had 2 of the prestige units come out. In fact, I don't think I played with the ranger.
No, in our last game, I had the ranger, and I scored a lot of points with the ranger, actually.
Did we have it available for
21 points.
Going back to the cleric, talked about the corruption. There's a building, somehow it's been, every time I've played the game, it's gotten into play there. If you assign a cleric to this building, you look at your lodgings, count up the number of corruption that you have there, and then he adds that much strength to one other unit. If you have 4 corruption in your lodgings, then one other unit's going to get a bonus of 4. So it can make a big difference.
Talked about some of the buildings that are locations that you can place your meeples on, permanent buildings that are printed on the board. You can also place your meeples on monsters. There are 3 different slots at each of the regions on the board for monsters to be placed. If you're going to place your meeples on a monster, any of those locations, you actually have to beat the monster. You can't fight the monster if you can't defeat the monster. That being said, if you place meeples anywhere in a region where there are 2 or 3 monsters, peasants are going to flee to wherever you are because the region is overrun.
You're coming to their rescue.
Essentially. If there are 2 monsters, it's considered overrun. If I go to a location there, I have to gain a white meeple, a peasant meeple, and it's going to be placed into my lodgings. 3 monsters in that location, I'm going to gain 2 peasants. There is a way to avoid this, and that is by use one of the actions. You also have to attack a monster in that region. If I attack just any one monster, I can then freely use any of those spaces and not gain any peasants at all. Normally, it should be fairly easy to cull your peasants if you don't want the peasants in your bag, if you're not upgrading peasants, but honestly, there are always 6 monsters on the board, and there are 12 slots for monsters to go. Something's going to be overrun always. 2 regions potentially that will be overrun, but there's always at least one.
So you talk about upgrading the peasants. Peasants can't level up. But this upgrading is when you defeat a monster or you complete a quest, you get these upgrades that you can place under one of the meeples that was involved in that conflict. Part of the reason I was able to upgrade my peasants so that they all gave me a fight value of 2. There's 3 different types of monsters. There's undead, humanoid, and monstrous. Under my peasant, they got a +1 fight against each of those monster types by completing quests or defeating monsters that gave those bonuses and those upgrades that would allow me to put it under those meeples because those meeples were involved in that conflict. I could place those upgrades under any of my basic heroes on my player board, which was very beneficial. I had a ton of stuff under my mages. I had made those mages very powerful to me, and my warriors. Those were my go-to meeples. I had the yellow mages, the blue warriors, and the white peasants. I think I only had 1 cleric, 1 maybe 2 knights, and the 1 shaman. I never leveled up the cleric nor the knights. I was just relying so much on my mages and my warriors and my peasants. Those upgrades are big, make the world a difference when you're going into combat. They give you some other benefits that are really cool, but just being able to increase that fight against those monsters was very beneficial to me.
And fighting monsters and completing quests are the 2 primary ways to get points in the game. Whenever someone's defeated any monsters on their turn, you draw monster cards to increase their count up to 6 again. And then there'll be 3 The Dark Council Arrives cards in the deck. When the first one comes out, everybody gains another corruption. Another corruption meeple goes into their lodging. And everybody's hand size essentially increased by 1. Beginning of the game, you only have 4 meeples that you get to pull from your bag. Once the Dark Council arrives for the first time, it increases to 5. When the second one comes out, the exact same thing happens. Everybody gains another corruption meeple, and your hand size increases by an additional meeple. So now you can draw 6 from your bag at the end of your turn during the draw phase. Finally, when the Dark Council arrives for the 3rd and final time, this will trigger the end of the game. You'll finish out the round. 2 more rounds, the game ends. During those 2 rounds are the only 2 rounds that you can fight any of the boss cards. That's the only time that you can fight the Overlord cards. There's 3 Overlord cards, 3 main bosses, and there's a henchman. The henchman you can fight each of those last 2 rounds. The 3 Overlord cards you can only fight once. Each of the Overlords will have a point bonus printed on the card. We give you bonus points if you meet criteria. So, for example, the main boss, Sauron, if you don't use any warrior meeples when you fight him, you're going to gain an extra point. Sapsucula is another of the overlords, and if you don't use any clerics, you gain an extra point. And then likewise, not only that, another random point bonus that will be placed under each of the overlords at the beginning of the game. It's going to be similar to that. If you don't use any peasants, for example, then you'll get extra points.
Yeah, I think they're usually worth an extra 3 points.
Right, they typically are. Once we have finished out those 2 rounds, whoever has the most points wins. Great game. I think it's awesome. I love the worker placement aspect of it, bag building aspect of this. I think it's great. The components are awesome. They're fun.
And they really just did a good job. Like we pointed out earlier, with those of you that were 21 points less than me.
Sitting right here, Dave.
Like
and over there.
You guys went completely different directions, and it was a close game.
21 points is not a close game.
It was luck.
It's Dave's obsession with cards.
Yeah.
That may be it. I did go for a lot of cards.
The thing I like about this, it is a deck builder, or it is a bag builder, and it does have worker placement. But the worker placement is different than most worker placement games. Some of the key things are you don't have to place all of your workers. When you're talking about going to battle the overlords, just because you have some of those meeples in your tavern doesn't mean you have to use them in that battle, so you could use them somewhere else. Also, when I'm putting my workers out at the end of my turn, I'm going to reclaim all my workers so that I'm not blocking anybody else from using any of the buildings that are on the board. You mentioned earlier, Dave, that there's only 8 buildings that are going to be on the board, but there's more than 8 buildings that are in the game. So it does provide quite a bit of variability in the play and experiences that you're going to have. Also, on a player's turn, there's not going to be anything that's not open.
I think it would be incredibly difficult if that wasn't the case, just because there are so many buildings that are worker-specific buildings.
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes it's difficult enough to be able to activate a building that you really want to activate that turn just because you don't have correct worker for it. If you had players blocking locations, I think it would slow it down a lot, almost make it frustrating.
I think that's something that you run into with a lot of worker placement games.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nathan. That is definitely how it differs from a standard what you would think of a worker placement type of game.
I thought it was kind of refreshing for the game because, yeah, it is supposed to be played quicker, and I absolutely agree. If you're trying to compete for locations as well as trying to compete for gaining meeples, the game could last a lot longer. I would think almost stop being fun.
Yeah, for sure. The rules say they highly recommend not playing with the Towers expansion for your first game. I disagree. If you're playing with beginner gamers, then okay, yeah, maybe. But the Towers don't really add a lot of complexity. They add more options, which I think is great. Add more ways to get points. A bit of set collection with the Towers where you're trying to get all 4 rods of ruin, then you're going to get 13 points, whereas if you only get 1, it's worth 2 points. A little bit more complexity, I guess, in that way. Not enough to where I think it overcomplicates the game. For a seasoned gamer, throw the Towers expansion in. It does not overcomplicate the game at all. I think it just adds more flavor to it.
I concur.
I did play this game with my mom. She's definitely not a gamer, but she thoroughly enjoyed it, and we did not add the Towers expansion. It was one of those circumstances where it was not a good idea to add the expansion in. Of course, it's your game group's discretion, but if you're seasoned gamers, throw it in.
It's not something I would include playing with my wife, but playing here at game night, want to play with it.
When we taught you, Nathan, it was not even a question. We just threw it in. I mean, it was, having played it once with the Tower expansion, it would be silly to not put this expansion in.
Excellent. That is Meeples and Monsters. I think we all liked it. I would strongly suggest picking it up.
I used to like it until I got beat by 21 points. No, it's a great game. I've played it multiple times. This is one I kickstarted and was really excited to get. It has not disappointed me. And I love the fact that it's a game that is fun for both seasoned gamers and a game that's fun for beginners.
That's what I was just going to point out. My final thoughts there is that it's a really good game, and I think it's really good to a lot of different levels.
Until next time.
We'll see you protecting Rowan from Sauron at the game table.
As always, we want to thank you for listening.
Check out our website. We have all sorts of cool things there. Love those blogs. Get a deeper look into the writing side of Meeple Nation.
Join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. I look forward to seeing you there.
Follow us on Twitter at Meeple Nation. We also have Instagram.
Under the same name. We also want to thank our sponsor, GameToppersLLC.com.
We love their product, and they have so much goodness out there.
And we also want to thank Braiding Detergent for our music. Welcome to
The evil forces of Mordra. Dang it! The evil forces of Mordra, pulled to the power of Sauron. Did you change these, Dave? you sure?
I haven't touched it, but that's awesome.
Does it really say that on the...
Where's your rules? Let me see the introduction of the rule book.
I hope it really says that. That's awesome.
It does.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
All right. Now I cannot say Lord of the Ring titles. A dark shadow.
So just to put it, you know how it's like the cleric has a crayon, or I guess he has glue, right? Like
Yeah.
it's goofiness that way, right? So more draw, right? Like it's cheesy to go with it. So, anyway.
Whoever musters the most potent forces, musters the whoever mosters. Goodness, Dave, are you doing the sponsorship here?
You mentioned when you introduced, you mentioned that it's 45 to 60 minute playtime.
Which, oddly enough, is our intro time as well. 45 to 60 minutes.
Right? You do have about 45 to 60 minutes of editing time, yes.